Now is the time for us to systematically reassess how we invest our public dollars.
Tell me this from all of you, and jump in when you want to here. The idea of one action that we hear a lot of is defunding police. And Aaron, I saw you retweeted something that showed the difference in what a police department may get versus, say, social services or schools or a health department. Right. For any of you, just jump in here and give me your vision of defunding. And Commissioner, when it gets to you, I'm curious of how a city responds when you do deal with murder numbers that I guess that none of us are proud of. And when you hear defund, what comes to mind? But Aaron, you jump in first because I did notice from you that tweet.
So the reason I've been so vocal about this is because I think a lot of people are uneducated about what this whole idea of defunding police actually means. As soon as they hear defunding, they think abolish. As soon as they hear defunding, they think dismantle. And in some cases, that is justified. But what I want to ask a lot of people is just to consider the whole idea of how much we ask and require police to do in our society on a day-to-day basis as a part of their job. The idea behind defunding the police is pretty simple. Instead of police being called to deal with homelessness or issues of brutality between people, then you would get somebody in the social services industry who's actually trained at de-escalating the situation. Instead of police being called when a drug overdose or a situation in the community arises around drug abuse, there's actually somebody that's trained in drug intervention and prevention that is called, that is allowed to actually de-escalate the situation and get somebody the help that they need. I think a lot of times we look at policing as the solution to the problems that our society is facing, the problems that we have as a city here in Baltimore. And my basic opinion is that policing is not a solution to these problems. Policing is a remedy to the effects. It's like addressing the branches on a tree and never uprooting the actual roots that are deeply embedded in society. So in order for us to actually see our city change for the better, in order for us to see the numbers go down in terms of crime, in terms of murders, all those kind of things, we have to start investing in people. And at a certain point, we have to start evaluating how much money is being spent on policing and how effective that really is. Okay. You know what I mean? How much is that actually translating to the type of training and the type of equipping that we need to be doing with our police department, as far as preparing them for actually engaging with the community and not being enforcing agents of the community. So I think that a lot of people get scared when they hear about this idea of defunding police. But what I want to start getting us to do as a society is talking about solutions. Because at the end of the day, if we can agree that policing is not a solution to these problems, then what does it look like to actually put people that are trained and skilled in the spaces that people are struggling in the spaces like drug abuse, in the spaces like mental health and emotional wellness, in the spaces like affordable housing and healthcare. You know, if we start investing in those areas, we will find that our need for policing will be a lot less. If you look at cities like Camden across the country, they've already shown you evidence of how when the police department was dismantled and reassembled, they actually did it with the community mindset of, we want to make sure that going forward, our people are not being persecuted by the same systems. And in order to do that, we have to address the systems just as systemically as they've been set up against our community.
Let me let the commissioner jump in here. What do you hear here, Commissioner, and how does this affect your job as you're working with a violence rate that is relatively high?
It is. First of all, I've been smiling, man, because I'm so proud. Aaron said it so eloquently. And, you know, I've been saying it since the very beginning. I fully agree with everything he just said. And I've been advocating for these programmatic solutions to support what we're doing in trying to address violent crime, because all of these issues he laid out are all the root causes and drivers of crime, things that either push people toward it or pull people toward it. And when we're dealing with these systemic issues that cause the environment that we're in, you know, police have been asked to be all things to all people. That has never been right, and it's not right now. So I fully agree with what he's saying. I have been advocating for those very programs. We're building a comprehensive violence reduction program right now called Focused Deterrence that deals with prevention, intervention, enforcement, which is for us, rehabilitation and reentry. The other 4 are not for police. But it has to deal, now that's a police department city program, but there has to be investment in all the other programmatic solutions to deal with all of the issues that create the environment that we're in, so police are not left to be the solution for it. Now, that being said, I have advocated that we be thoughtful and mindful of how we do that. Certainly, I understand defunding the police and the concept behind it. I don't need to repeat it because Aaron said it so eloquently. It's not abolishing, but it's taking money to put in other programs. The concern I have is how do we do that when we're cutting now to put it in perhaps programs that are not yet built, or the infrastructure is not yet ready to support the gap that's going to be created if by chance we cut now and the infrastructure or the programs are not ready to take it on because the police have to stop on a certain time because there's no funding for it. So my concern is the gaps that are created. How do we do that? I have often given the analogy of building a stadium. Nowhere do you tear down a stadium and then start building a new one, which takes a year, 2 years, or 3 years, and the teams have to either not play or do something different in the interim. What you see is you build a stadium, if you can, you continue to play in the old stadium, and you transition into the new stadium, and then you tear down the old stadium so there's no gap. My concern is who picks up the slack? How do we fill the gap? How do we not cause more harm because we have ceased on doing something that has been expected of us over time, and now it's being delivered to another social service provider that's not either ready to handle fully or not even built at all. And
Commissioner,
that I have.
I see some heads nodding here. Go ahead and jump in, anybody.
Yeah, Jason, I was just going to say, I know the word defund has taken over and it's kind of the word of choice on social media and other like. But I think the biggest thing is really looking at it as a reallocation of resources, like many people have kind of already communicated on this on the show. But when we think about that reallocation of resources and we just look at like the city's Baltimore's budget and we see that, over the past 20, 30, 40 years, there's been a significant increase in spending with law enforcement. And then we look at that same time period, there's been a significant reduction, in comparison to, say, inflation, to education, and to recs and parks, that's like really sits at the core of the problem. So, when we talk about building a better Baltimore, when we talk about building a sustainable Baltimore, when we talk about growing our city, we understand that we can't just do that by an overinflated budget associated with the police department and increasing that year over year over year. I've been off the council for the past 5 years, and the budget has increased significantly since then. And this was a problem then. So I think that what the pandemic, the global pandemic has forced us to do during quarantine is really take a step back, look at not only what took place in Minneapolis, but also take a reflection on where we are. And as many people have said, as I've constantly said, to understand and know where we are 5 years after the unrest, after every international camera was pointed on West Baltimore, and know that West Baltimore still appears to be in the same condition that it was in now, then is a major, major problem. So when we talk about defund, it's not about defunding, breaking down, losing. It's not that we do not need police officers. It's just that we need to set a priority for some of the other core and roots of the issue, be it food insecurity, be it learning through virtual learning, be it homelessness, be it all these things that we know exist. And again, right now, while we have the will, while we have the conscience, while we have the compassion of so many, it's time to take the bull by the horns and ensure that we build a Baltimore and America that we can all be proud of.
Senator, go ahead.
If I could just,
no, sorry, Jane. Go on, Jane. Go ahead.
Well, just this week, we've seen a debate that's going on now in the city council about defunding. The city council in Baltimore does not have the power to reallocate, to redirect funding. But I do think that incrementally, this is the first time in my experience where there's actually been serious debate about reallocating funding in the city budget. But I think the overriding question for people, and people are starting to ask themselves, is what do we want public safety to look like? How do we get to public safety? This is like a reality check. In the city of Baltimore, in the most challenged communities, the police department may be the only institutional authority that exists. And that's been the case for a long time. And that gets us to the point where police officers are asked to do all kinds of things they're not trained to do. So you have to be able to fill in the gap. If we're going to defund a particular initiative that we've been doing for the past centuries, what is going to take that place so that services are delivered and that people don't feel abandoned? People don't feel like, oh my God, now the cops are gone. Who's going to be there now? And it's a very tricky question, and we also have just the nuts and bolts of the question, which has to do with the labor agreement, LEOBOR, the state law that has to do with policing. I mean, these are all challenging, really challenging questions. And I might add, you can't solve them by just tweaking a budget. This really requires a real conversation about reimagining public safety.
Sure. Senator, jump in there.
Well, I think there's consensus that we ask our police to do way too much, and that they are not the agency and people who are trained in addressing a substance abuse issue or homelessness, mental health issues. When people call 911, they call for all sorts of different reasons. So I'm going to propose an amendment next week as part of this justice and policing debate to create a federal fund that would support jurisdictions that establish emergency response teams focused on social services that address those other kinds of key issues that we're talking about, that Aaron talked about, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, so that when you call 911, if it's a violent crime situation, the police respond. But if it's one of these other situations that we don't want to see escalate, we would organize ourselves in a way where we had a different kind of emergency community response. And so we want to incentivize jurisdictions to move in that direction, as others have been talking about.
Wesley, I'm guessing that, and you'll have to unmute yourself here, I'm guessing that as we talk about defunding and laws and what passes and what doesn't, I'm thinking that people on the street, while this is, good fodder for them, I think they want something very tangible. And simple. I think for some people, I listened to a mother today said she just wanted to see her son come home from a drive. When you talk to people that you are leading, what specifically do they want to see out of a new America?
So a lot of the times people feel like they're actually being condemned for the conditions that they have been forced to live, grow up in, and survive in. And what I mean by that is like, when you live in a community that don't have the resources that they need to survive every day, and you just put, more and more officers in that community to actually sanction these people, they looking at it like, well, they doing certain things or we live a certain way to survive, but we being condemned and judged for that. So if you're going to judge us, then where are the resources? So it's when you have this conversation, it's a large conversation that needs to be had about first the education system of how we have tons of students that might be in the 10th or 11th grade, but academically they are still on the 2nd and 3rd grade reading level. So that now this holds them back from getting jobs. Or we have thousands, over 16,000 abandoned properties and buildings and homes in this community, but we also have a lot of homelessness. So when police are getting called on people who are homeless, living on the street, then where do we send these people? Then where do they go? When you have students that can't read, write, and count at proficient grade level, when you have parents that are struggling with drug addictions and things like that, it's almost like, what do you expect us to do? When you have kids that don't have safe places to play, but the police are being called on these individuals, then what do you expect? But also when you talk about police brutality, me as being a young Black man that is educated with degrees, own businesses and a property owner, things like life, if I'm pulled over by. So when you say change, people don't want to feel like they're going to lose their life just by getting a traffic ticket and things like that. People feel unsafe every day in their own community.